Welcome to the channel, my alien friends. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Enjoy listening the mining. Ship Piraeus drifted silently on the edge of a dying star surrounded by the cold and unforgiving void inside its aging. Metal hulls felt tinkered with a broken diagnostic tool, her callous fingers moving with an absent-minded precision. The faint hum of the ship's engines was the only sound that kept her grounded. She had learned to tune out the isolation of space, but the weight of it never truly left. Her quarters were cramped and dim, illuminated by a few flickering lights and the steady blue glow of various screens. Tools and parts were scattered across her workbench, organized in a way only Saren understood. Here in this mechanical nest, she could forget the vastness outside, forget the others, forget herself. The mining vessel had been in this sector for months, tearing minerals from asteroids and space debris near the event horizon of a decaying star. Most of the crew kept to themselves, a mix of hardened mercenaries and contract workers who preferred the silence of space to the chaos of human life on Earth. But Saren liked it that way. The distance, the quiet machines were easier to understand than people, less complicated, less dangerous. But lately something was wrong. The cosmic anomalies had started a few weeks ago. Distortions in space, strange pulses of energy that rippled through the ship's systems and caused brief, unexplainable power surges. At first it was manageable, another issue to solve, but the star's death throes were growing stronger. Saren had noticed how time seemed to warp on the outer hull, how light twisted unnaturally around the vessel. The ship felt like it was teetering on the edge of a precipice. As she adjusted a circuit, a shrill alarm echoed through the corridor, shattering the silence. Saren froze, her heart skipping a beat. Alarms only meant two things out here: collision or something far worse. Throwing down her tools, she sprinted toward the control room. The corridors were long, dim, and deserted, but as she approached the bridge, she saw several of the crew already gathered, their faces tense, eyes fixed on the large view screen. Saren shoved her way through the group until she saw it, a Varian ship, crippled and spinning slowly in the star's gravitational pull. "Damn it," Captain Pierce muttered under his breath, his rough voice cutting through the tension. His weathered face was bathed in the pale light of the screen. "It's one of theirs. Why are they so close to the anomaly?" Bavarian Empire was one of the more advanced alien species humanity had encountered, reserved and mysterious. They seldom ventured into human space unless for critical missions, and their ships, sleek silver vessels capable of faster-than-light travel, were rarely seen. Without purpose, they must have been caught in the anomaly, Saren muttered as she scanned the ship's condition. Its hull was riddled with damage, some sections torn apart by the gravitational distortions of the star. "They won't survive much longer in that pull, Captain. We can't just leave them." Another crew member said, GL glancing nervously at Pierce. "I know that," Pierce snapped, rubbing his temples. "Saren, can we get them aboard?" She nodded, already calculating the logistics. "We'll need to use the emergency docking protocol, but we can pull them in if we move fast." Pierce grimaced, but there was no choice to it. Saren moved quickly, her mind already processing the task. The docking maneuver was risky, especially with the gravitational instability, but she'd done more dangerous things in space. In minutes she had guided the Percy close enough to initiate a magnetic lock, securing the Varian ship and pulling it into the docking bay. The moment the door slid open, the air in the bay felt different. Charged Saren was used to mechanical problems, but this felt alive, like something beyond her comprehension had entered the ship. She scanned the Varian vessel through the observation window, noting the damage, the sparks flying from torn conduits. It was a miracle it hadn't disintegrated entirely. And movement caught her eye, a figure. It was hard to see through the smoke and debris, but Saren could make out a silhouette stepping through the wreckage, moving with purpose. As the smoke cleared, the figure came into full view, tall, graceful, and undeniably alien. The Varian woman stood at the threshold of her ruined ship, her silver hair glowing faintly in the dim light, skin shimmering With a soft iridescence, her eyes were a piercing violet, unnaturally focused. Despite the wreckage around her form-fitting uniform made of a material Saren couldn't recognize was torn in places, revealing glimpses of her inhuman physique, muscles more defined than any human's, yet somehow delicate. Saren's breath caught in her throat. She had seen Varens before in the Alliance databases, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of standing in the presence of one, especially one so powerful. The woman's gaze locked onto Saren's, and for a moment the noise of the ship, the alarms, the chaos all faded into the background. There was only the Varian and the weight of the void between them. "You're human," the Variant spoke, her voice low, tinged with an unsettling calm. Saren blinked, trying to shake off the paralysis. "Yeah, and you're not." Her voice came out more steady than she felt. "I am Kata," the Varian said, stepping closer. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if she was testing the air between them. "Officer of the Varian Empire, my ship was caught in the anomaly. We saw you're lucky you didn't get pulled into the stars." Saren paused, unsure how to continue. "We don't have much in the way of luxury, but we'll help you with repairs if we can." Kata tilted her head, studying Saren like she was some strange creature. "Repairs will not be enough. The anomaly has disrupted the stability of this region. If we do not leave soon, your ship will suffer the same fate as mine." Saren clenched her jaw. "I'm already working on stabilizing our systems, but your ship is beyond repair." Kata interrupted, her voice cool. "I will assist you in stabilizing this vessel. It is the only logical option." For a moment neither woman spoke. Saren was used to being alone, used to solving her own problems without interference, but something about Ka unsettled her, not just because she was alien, but because of the way her eyes seemed to see through her, as if reading thoughts. Saren wasn't ready to confront. Saren said, finally, nodding toward the exit. "Let and get to work." As they'd walked toward the control room, Cade's presence felt like a living shadow at Saren's side. The ship groaned under the strain of the anomaly outside, but in the silence that followed, the real danger was something neither of them could quite understand, something that had begun to stir between them. Quiet but undeniable, echoing in the void. The dim corridors of the Perseus felt heavier as the days passed. The strange distortions near the star seemed to mirror the tension building within the ship. Kaida moved through the vessel with a silent precision, her presence unsettling the crew, who watched her with suspicion and fear. To them, she was an enigma, alien, dangerous, and too close to the ship's erratic anomalies to be a coincidence. But to Saren, Kaida was becoming something else entirely. Saren had always preferred the comfort of machines, the predictable hum of technology. Emotions were messy, and people even more so. She'd never been good with relationships, keeping herself distant from the crew. But now, as she found herself working side by side with Kaida, she couldn't shake the growing connection between them. It was as if the Varian's presence was more than physical. Something invisible yet palpable had begun to tie them together. The repairs had dragged on longer than expected. Cade's ship was beyond salvation, and now her only hope rested with the Piraeus. Saren spent long hours in the bowels of the ship, adjusting delicate systems, attempting to stabilize the ship's failing core. Every now and then she would catch Kaida watching her, those piercing violet eyes, unreadable and sharp, yet softened by something Saren couldn't quite name. What? Saren asked one evening, wiping sweat from her brow as she caught Cade's gaze lingering. Kaida didn't answer immediately, her gaze still locked on her. "And your mind, it works in ways I did not anticipate. You grasp complexities that even some Varian engineers would struggle with." Saren snorted, though her pulse quickened at the compliment. "I've been fixing machines since I was a kid." "You learned to adapt." Kaida stepped closer, her presence unnervingly magnetic. "It is more than that," she said, her voice low, almost intimate. "There is something about you, Saren, something that I cannot ignore." Saren's heart skipped a beat, though she tried to mask it with a laugh. "We both stuck on a ship in the middle of a dying star system. You're probably just bored." Cade's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something deeper crossing her face. Something almost vulnerable. "No, this is not boredom. This is different." Saren felt a strange heat rise in her chest, A tension she wasn't sure she wanted to acknowledge. She swallowed hard, focusing on the exposed wires and circuits in front of her, trying to ground herself in the tangible and the real. But Cade's words echoed in her mind, stirring feelings she had long buried. As the days passed, the anomalies grew stronger, warping time and space around the ship. It wasn't just the equipment that felt the strain. Saren could feel it too. The ship seemed to twist and groan with a life of its own, and with each passing hour, the weight of the situation pressed down harder on her chest. Late one night, Saren found herself in the engine room, alone except for the low hum of the machinery. The lights flickered, and for a moment the darkness felt all-encompassing, as if the void outside was creeping and trying to swallow her whole. She exhaled slowly, wiping the sweat from her forehead, her muscles aching from the strain of the long hours. Then she felt Kita's presence even before she turned to see her standing in the doorway. The Varian moved like a shadow, her steps silent, her gaze intense. In the dim light, her silver hair shimmered like starlight, casting a faint glow around her that seemed almost ethereal. "I thought you were resting," Saren said, her voice coming out softer than she intended. "I cannot rest," Kita replied, stepping closer. "The anomalies are getting worse, and I have been thinking about what." Kita stopped a few feet away, close enough that Saren could feel the faint warmth radiating from her. For a moment there was silence, thick and charged about us, Kita said quietly, "about the bond that is forming." Saren's breath caught. "Bond?" Kay nodded, her eyes searching Saren's face, looking for something unspoken in Varian culture. "Bonds are rare, but when they form they are intense. I have never felt anything like this before." Her voice wavered slightly, betraying an emotion she was clearly not used to showing. Saren's throat tightened, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process what Kita was telling her. She had felt the connection growing between them, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real and terrifying. "I don't know what's happening," Saren whispered, "but I feel it too." Cade's hand reached out, brushing against Saren's wrist. The touch was light, barely there, but it sent a jolt through Saren's entire body. For a moment, the ship, the anomalies, the danger, it all faded into the background. There was only Kita, her warmth, and the unspoken bond between them that neither could deny. "We are not alone in this," Kita murmured, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her eyes. "Whatever this is, we will face it together." Saren's breath shuddered as she nodded, her hand instinctively closing over Kita's. The void outside seemed to whisper around them, dark and endless. But in that moment, amidst the chaos and the darkness, they were bound by something stronger than either of them had anticipated, something that neither space nor time could break. The star outside was dying faster than Saren could have predicted. Its light, once steady and oppressive, now flickered like the pulse of a wounded beast. The ship groaned with every ripple of distortion, the fabric of space bending in ways that should have been impossible. But it wasn't just the star that was collapsing. Something inside Saren was breaking too. She stood alone in the dim control room, staring at the view screen where the star's light cast strange shadows across her face. The ship systems were straining, the alarms a constant background noise as panels flickered and sparked. She should have been working, focusing on stabilizing the engines or trying to fix the mess that had swallowed them. But her mind kept drifting to the only person who had managed to pierce the cold wall she built around herself, Kita. The bond between them had grown undeniable, pulling Sarah in with a force as powerful as the gravitational storms outside. It was more than attraction. It was like something deeper, something that transcended the boundaries of species and reason. But it terrified her. She had always been alone, always kept her distance from others, and now there was Kita. She couldn't let herself fall. Not now, not in the middle of this chaos. The door behind her slid open with a quiet hiss, and Saren didn't have to turn around to know who it was. She felt Cade's presence, like a whisper in her mind, like the gentle pull of gravity towards something inevitable. Saren Cade's voice was soft, but there was an edge to it. She had felt the tension between them growing just as much as Saren had. Saren swallowed hard, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. "We don't have time for this, Kita." The ship is falling apart. We don't have time to ignore it, either, Kata said. Stepping closer, her footsteps were nearly silent, but Saren could feel the heat of her presence, the energy that pulsed between them like an invisible current. The room felt too small, too confined. Saren couldn't escape the truth. I don't know what you want from me, Saren said, her voice brittle, cracking under the weight of everything she'd been holding back. I don't know how to do this. I'm not like you. Kata came to stand beside her, close enough that their arms brushed. She didn't push, didn't demand, but her presence was impossible to ignore. You think I know how to do this? Cade's voice was soft but laced with an emotion Saren had never heard before. Vulnerability. I was trained to be detached, logical, to follow orders, and never let emotion cloud my judgment. But you, Kata paused, her breath trembling. You've shattered everything I thought I knew about myself. Saren closed her eyes, biting back, the wave of emotion rising in her chest. The ship shuddered again, the groaning metal a reminder of the imminent danger. But this was the real storm, the one inside her. I don't know how to let you in, Saren whispered. I don't know how to be what you need. Kata was silent for a moment, the hum of the ship filling the space between them. Then, with a tenderness that startled Saren, Kata reached out her hand, gently cupping Saren's face, turning her to meet her gaze. You don't have to be anything, Kata said, her violet eyes soft, shimmering with something unspoken. We are both fractured, but together, maybe we can be whole. The words struck Saren like a blow. She felt her resolve breaking, the walls she had built crumbling under the weight of Cade's touch, her words, her presence. Her heart raced, her throat tightening with a mix of fear and longing. She wanted to pull away, to retreat back into the safety of isolation, but she couldn't, not anymore. Cade's hand lingered, her thumb brushing lightly across Saren's cheek, and for a moment it was as if the chaos outside didn't matter. The dying star, the anomalies, the ship falling apart, it was all distant, all meaningless compared to the storms swirling between them. I'm scared, Saren admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. It was the first time she had ever said it out loud, the first time she had let herself be vulnerable. Cade's eyes softened, and she leaned in, resting her forehead against Saren's, their breaths mingling in the small space between them. So am I. Saren let out a shaky breath, her chest tightening with the weight of the moment. But as she stood there pressed against Kata, feeling the warmth of her body and the steady beat of her pulse, something inside her began to shift. The fear was still there, but so was something else. Hope, connection. Cade was right. They were both fractured, but together, maybe they could survive this. The ship shuddered again, a violent tremor that sent sparks flying from the control panels, but this time Saren didn't flinch. She stood firm, Kata at her side, and for the first time since the anomalies began, she felt like she wasn't alone. The stars outside fractured and flickered, their light casting strange patterns across the floor, but amidst the darkness Saren felt something new, a bond that was growing strong and unbreakable, a bond that against all odds might just save them both. The ship was tearing apart at the seams. The Piraeus shuddered violently as another wave of distortion rippled through the vessel, sending a cascade of sparks from the overloaded panels. Saren barely managed to keep her footing as she sprinted down the corridor, her heart pounding in her chest. The red emergency lights bathed everything in an eerie glow, casting long shadows that twisted unnaturally in the flickering light. Kata was ahead of her, moving with a grace that seemed impossible in the chaos, but even the Varian was struggling now, her usual calm demeanor cracking under the relentless strain. The dying star outside had reached a critical stage, its gravitational pull growing stronger with every passing second. Time and space were warping around them, bending reality in ways Saren couldn't fully comprehend. We're running out of time, Saren shouted, her voice barely audible over the wailing alarms. Kata didn't look back, her voice tight with tension. I know this is destabilizing. If we don't fix the core now, the ship will be pulled into the star's event horizon. Saren's breath hitched as she glanced out one of the viewport windows. The star was a swirling mass of crimson and gold, collapsing in on itself with a terrifying beauty. The gravitational Distortions around it twisted light and matter, creating cracks in space that shimmered like fractured glass. It was as if the universe itself was being ripped apart, and they were caught in the middle of it. "We can't hold the ship together much longer," Saren said, her voice breaking. "The engines are failing, the hull's at its limit, there's nothing left." Kata stopped abruptly, spinning to face Saren. Her eyes, usually so composed, were wide with desperation. "There's still a chance, but it requires you." Saren froze, her chest tightening at the intensity in Cade's gaze. "What do you mean?" Kata stepped closer, her voice trembling slightly. "The bond between us, it's stronger than I anticipated, stronger than anything I've felt before. It's affecting the anomalies." Saren's stomach twisted. She had felt the bond growing between them, but she hadn't realized how much it was influencing the ship, the very fabric of reality around them. It wasn't just emotions anymore. Something deeper was at play. "I don't understand," Saren whispered, taking a step back. "What do you mean it's affecting the anomalies?" Cade's expression softened, but there was a raw urgency in her eyes. "Our connection, it's intertwined with the energy of the star. I can feel it. The more we resist, the more unstable the anomaly becomes. But if we give into it, we might be able to channel the energy, stabilize the ship at least long enough to get out of here." Saren's mind raced, struggling to process what Kata was saying. The idea that their bond, something so personal, so intimate, could be the key to saving the ship, felt surreal. But the truth was, nothing about the situation made sense anymore. Reality itself was unraveling, and this bond, the strange connection, was the only thing that had felt real amidst the chaos. "What does giving in even mean?" Saren asked, her voice wavering. She wasn't sure if she was ready for the answer. Kata stepped closer, the space between them charged with tension. "It means letting go, surrendering to the connection to us." Saren's heart pounded in her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to pull away, to retreat behind the emotional walls she had spent years building. But the ship was dying, the star was collapsing, and the only thing keeping them tethered to reality was this fragile bond between them. Kata reached out her hand, trembling slightly as it hovered near Saren's cheek. "I know you're scared, so am I, but we don't have time to be afraid anymore. If we don't do this, we're both going to die here." Saren's breath caught in her throat. The weight of Kita's words crashed over her like a tidal wave, pulling her under. She was terrified of the bond, of the intensity of her feelings for Kita, of what it meant to lose control. But beneath the fear was something stronger, something that had been growing between them since the moment Kita had arrived on the Percus. Saren swallowed hard, her gaze locking with Kita's. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lit into it, Cade's eyes softened, a flicker of relief crossing her face. Without another word, she closed the distance between them, her hand gently cupping Saren's face. The warmth of her touch sent a shiver through Saren, and for a moment the chaos around them seemed to fade. There was only Kata, her presence steady and strong, grounding Saren in a way she hadn't realized she needed. The ship groaned violently, a reminder of the danger that still loomed. But as Kata leaned in, her forehead resting gently against Saren, the bond between them pulsed, a wave of energy surging through Saren's body. It was overwhelming, like standing in the eye of a storm, surrounded by chaos, but untouched by it. Saren closed her eyes, letting herself be pulled into the connection. She could feel Cade's heartbeat, steady and strong, mirroring her own. Their breath synced, their thoughts blurred, and in that moment the line between them did disappear. The ship trembled, the walls groaning under the strain of the anomaly. But then something shifted. The energy that had been tearing the ship apart seemed to bend around them, the distortion slowing, stabilizing. Saren opened her eyes, meeting Cade's gaze. "It's working," she whispered, barely daring to believe it. Kata nodded, her expression a mix of relief and awe. "We're not out of this yet, but together we have a chance." The breaking point had come, and against all odds they had found their way through it. Together the star exploded in silence. From the viewport of the Perseus, Saren watched as the dying sun collapsed in on itself, its light warping into a furious spiral before it vanished into the abyss. For a moment, the void held its breath, and then the star imploded, sending Ripples of distortion through space, the cosmic rift yawned open, tearing the universe apart in front of their eyes. Saren's heart skipped as the ship trembled violently, caught in the gravitational chaos. Alarms wailed, warning of imminent structural failure. But it was nothing new. They had been on the edge of destruction for what felt like hours, but this time something was different. The bond between Saren and Kata thrummed with life, a pulse of energy that crackled between them. Their connection had stabilized the ship before pulling them back from the brink. Now it was all that stood between them and the annihilation of the stars. Collapsed Saren felt the warmth of Cade's presence at her side, her body just inches away, her breath steady despite the madness outside. Kata had been a force of strength and calm, but now Saren could feel the uncertainty, the weight of the unknown pressing against her. They were both on the precipice, standing at the edge of something they didn't fully understand. I don't know if this will hold, Saren whispered, her voice shaking as the ship shuddered once more. The rift, it's too strong, we can't outrun it. Cade's hand found hers, fingers intertwining, grounding Saren in a way she hadn't expected. We don't need to outrun it, Kata said, her voice soft but resolute. We go through. Saren turned, meeting Cade's eyes. There was no fear in them, only the steady determination that had drawn Saren to her in the first place. But beneath that strength, Saren saw something else, trust in her, in them, in the bond they shared, fragile yet unbreakable through the rift. Saren's voice trembled, that could tear us apart. Kata squeezed her hand gently, her thumb brushing over Sar's knuckles in a soothing gesture. It's our only chance. The rift is unstable, but it's also our way out. The gravitational field is collapsing. If we don't move now, we'll be trapped in the debris. Saren's heart raced, her mind spinning with the impossible choice before them. The rift was unpredictable, a tear in the very fabric of space. It could lead anywhere or nowhere, but staying meant certain death, a slow destruction as the ship was crushed under the weight of the stars. Collapse, Saren, Cade's voice cut through the noise, anchoring her. I'm with you. Whatever happens, we face it together. Saren closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of Cade's hand in hers, the steady pulse of the bond between them. The fear didn't disappear, but something else filled its place, something stronger. She opened her eyes, locking gazes with Kata. Let him do it. Kata nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her feet. She turned to the control panel, her movements swift and precise. Brace yourself. This will be rough. Saren didn't let go of Kata's hand. She couldn't, as the ship groaned and shuddered, the cosmic rift widening. Before them, the only thing that felt real was the warmth of Kata's touch, the connection that pulsed between them like a heartbeat. The ship lurched forward, the engines roaring as Kata guided them straight into the rift. The space around them twisted violently, light bending into impossible shapes, colors bleeding together in a dizzying swirl. The gravitational forces pulled at them, threatening to tear the ship apart, to rip them from each other. Saren gripped Cade's hand tighter, her knuckles white. The ship's alarms blared louder, warning of structural collapse. But there was no turning back now. They were in the heart of the rift, surrounded by chaos, by the raw power of the universe unraveling around them. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The ship burst through the other side, tumbling into the stillness of open space. For a long moment there was silence. The alarms fell quiet. The shaking stopped. The rift, the star, the collapsing galaxy, all of it was gone. Saren blinked, her breath catching. As she stared out the viewport, they were surrounded by stars, distant twinkling points of light, untouched by the madness. They had just escaped. The void was calm, serene, a stark contrast to the storm they had left behind. We made it, Kata whispered, her voice filled with awe. Saren let out a shaky breath, her body still trembling from the adrenaline. We made it. She turned to Kata, who was still holding her hand, their fingers intertwined. For a moment, they just stood there, letting the weight of what they had survived wash over them. The bond between them was stronger now, no longer a fragile connection, but something solid, something unbreakable. I couldn't have done this without you, Saren admitted, her voice raw with emotion. I don't know how. Kata cut her off with a gentle smile, her eyes soft. You don't have to explain. I feel it too. Saren swallowed her chest. Tight the fear, the doubt, the walls she had spent years building. It all seemed so small now. Kaida had torn down those walls without even trying, and now there was no going back, and for the first time. Saren didn't want to. Kaida stepped closer, her forehead resting against Saren, their breaths mingling in the stillness of the ship. Whatever comes next, Kaida murmured, we face it together. Saren nodded, her eyes closing as she leaned into the touch, letting herself fall into the warmth of Kaida's presence. Together, outside, the stars shimmered in the vast expanse, infinite and unknowable. But here, in this quiet moment, Saren had found something she never thought possible, a home, not in the ship, not in the stars, but in the bond they shared, one that could survive even the darkest corners of the universe, and whatever lay beyond the cosmic rift, they would face it together.